they're interesting because they're not universally loved. There are reasons for that, going back to the fact that you have the Bayer Corporation involved. If you want to dig a bit deeper, you can also say that they are not a modern construct. It's not as though Bayer is using the football club as a marketing arm of Bayer, to sell their products. They're not. And they were set up as the factory 11, the Werkself, as they're known, the factory 11, the factory team of Bayer. And without Bayer, there wouldn't be a Leverkusen as we know it. There wouldn't be a town of Leverkusen, very small community, although within a greater metropolis, very close to Köln, but overshadowed by Köln in terms of day-to-day media activities, even though they may well get relegated as we speak now. But that's another story for another day. But yeah, they're not loved by everybody, but I think there's real respect for what they have done. And Xabi Alonso, of course, deserves a lot of the credit, but also Simon Rolfes, the sporting chief, whose contacts are second to none, and who hit the target with pretty much every signing last summer. But yeah, this is, mentioned those previous generations. This is one that I think is going to top anything Leverkusen have done, and they do deserve applause for that.
You mentioned the role of Bayer, the corporation, which this week I learned invented aspirin, which is a good work on their part, I think. But it was originally a petition from the workers to start this team and what became the Factory 11, as you say. How does that legacy manifest in the modern day for this club? They are still called the Werkself, as you said, as you pronounced it much better than me. But how does it manifest in any other ways in the club culture?
Well, if you go to Leverkusen, the first thing you see is the Bayer Kreuz, the Bayer cross. That is sort of the defining symbol of Leverkusen. And to paint the picture, if anybody doesn't know, Leverkusen is this sort of Köln offshoot. You have the city of Cologne, which I think most people have heard of, and is famous for its cathedral, and, is one of the major cities in Germany. And then just a few kilometers away, and you can see it if you ever go to the area of Köln called Mülheim, which I spend quite a bit of time in. You can actually see the Bayer Kreuz from there. It's just on the other side of the Rhine, across the bridge. And, the community itself, apart from Bayer, there's not an awful lot in Leverkusen that people would say is particularly memorable. It's just a community. It's not, it's not like Cologne that has the dome, the cathedral. And so I think that is a very important thing to realize, first of all. And, you spoke about aspirin, die Pillen, the pills. That's the sort of the nickname that's sometimes bestowed upon this football club. So, I mean, it's very much there, and it can be used in a derogatory fashion. But Leverkusen fans, and they did a very nice choreo recently, Tifo, before one of the games. It was the Pokal semi-final against Fortuna Düsseldorf, which basically in the Nordkurve, the loudest part of the Bayer Arena, they came up with this choreo that essentially celebrated the origins of Bayer Leverkusen. And I heard critical voices from afar, some people saying, no, well, all you're doing is glorifying Bayer. But the response to that was, well, without Bayer, there would be no community here. This is how it started. And it was a factory. It was more innocent days, if you like. It wasn't a major multinational corporation. But without Bayer, we wouldn't have this community very near Cologne that we have. So that's important. And it's, I think, difficult for people who maybe only follow peripherally to understand in that area how big a force Köln is as a football force. I'm talking about day to day. If you go to a coffee shop or a pub in that area, the talk will be about Köln. It will not be about Leverkusen. Maybe in particular Leverkusen coffee shops and bars, but generally speaking, they get a bit lost in the shuffle. And there's far more attention paid to this club Köln that has gone up and down the Bundesliga, and looks as though is heading back down again into the Zweite Bundesliga. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you people are not glory hunters in that area. But what I have noticed is that a lot of younger fans seem to be gravitating towards Leverkusen. Maybe fans who already had those sympathies, held those sympathies, but the membership is up and it's become much harder to get a Leverkusen ticket. Used to be, a bit of a standing joke that if you wanted to experience the Bundesliga, you could always get a Leverkusen ticket. That wasn't necessarily completely true, but you could do it more easily than Köln, which is still impossible. Guarantee if somebody tries to get a ticket for the next couple of home games for Köln, whether they're relegated by then or not, good luck. You're just not going to do it. It's not something that's attainable. So I think that is important to mention in the context of Leverkusen and who they are. But they certainly are growing this season, and I think internationally they've made great strides. I think they've been at the forefront of that, much better than many other Bundesliga clubs.
Is the sort of distaste that maybe some in Germany have for Bayer owning the club, is that tied up in the 50+1 rule in Germany that clubs by and large are owned by the fans, or at least controlled by the fans, with some exceptions? Bayer Leverkusen is not the only exception, but for the most part, that is sort of the club ownership model, right?
Yes, that's the sort of the de facto position. There are variations on the theme with regard to whether you have a company that's outsourced that looks after the football operation, and sometimes you have a separate company that looks after the club or is the club, so to speak, and that is under 50+1. It does vary from club to club. But broadly speaking, yeah, Leverkusen have an exemption based on that. And so it is argued, let's just put it this way, it is argued that this allows them to have advantages that other clubs don't have. It allows Bayer to be able to do certain things that other clubs aren't able to do. And they would say unfairly, because they would say other clubs are playing by these rules. And the German football, and I would agree with this, German football is better for 50+1. There's a reason why things that seem to be happening in other leagues and, for want of a better way to put it, selling one's soul, can't really happen as easily in Germany. And it's down to 50+1 and the fact that you simply can't come in and buy a German club as a whole. You can't come in and do what happens in England. Now, some people maybe in America would think, oh, well, what's wrong with that? But if you understand German football culture, you'll know that part of what makes it all magical, part of why we have the largest attendances anywhere in the world, part of why things are affordable, part of why your public transport is wrapped into your matchday ticket, all these things stem from 50+1. So I think that is the kind of the feeling. There's not the same animosity towards Leverkusen, and I think this is because of the history, because of going back to 1904 being a factory club. There's not the same animosity that you get with Leipzig or with Wolfsburg or with Hoffenheim, even though they've, technically speaking, taken themselves back into 50+1. That's something that's just happened relatively recently with Dietmar Hopp, the long-standing club patron. But it's complicated, let's just say. But yeah, there are still people, especially in the greater Köln area, who feel that what happens with Leverkusen is not quite right.